Hello, everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising. Please be sure to like this video down below before you are finished watching, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about one man, and that is going to be Donald J. Trump. The 45th President of the United States, lost re-election in 2020, is now running for a second non-consecutive term as the Republican nominee once again in 2024, hoping to be the 47th President of the United States as well. And there is only one Donald Trump. He's a very controversial figure, beloved by many, hated by others, completely transforming the American political landscape over the past decade, and with it, the Republican Party as well. I make this video as a supporter of Trump, someone who has voted for him before and plans to do so again, without a doubt, this November. He has by and large moved the GOP to the right on many, many issues, whether it be foreign policy, immigration, education, election integrity, law and order, the war on drugs, taxation, international trade, bringing manufacturing jobs back home to America, strengthening our production capabilities here at home. He was, and continues to be, pretty much our best option on all of those issues. Policy positions that I align with him completely on. Things that I applaud him for moving the Republican Party in the right direction on. And even furthermore, some of those things were never even in the Republican Party's platform to begin with, and he has added them in, or at least made their stances stronger on those issues. And that's a very, very good thing. My only main disagreement with him overall is his stances on some social conservative policy positions. But even on those topics, he has not been a hindrance, he's actually been a huge help. Take the pro-life issue, for example. He's not the most outspoken or open pro-life candidate ever seen by the Republican Party, far from it. But he literally appointed the judges on the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade, that gave conservative states the ability to enact pro-life protections, and took many executive actions that were at his disposal through the means of the executive branch, that he was doing what he could to curb abortion and funding for abortion at home and abroad. And even when it comes to the issue of marriage and family, Trump does lean more liberal when it comes to that topic, a little bit more than you would like as a conservative Republican. But even still, the majority of his actions as president supported the conservative stance on that issue and did not overall seek to undermine it, and many of his advisors and top allies are more conservative on the issue. So I have trust that, just like last time, any executive action he takes on that issue will not undermine the values of Christian conservatives in this country that support him, and will not backstab the values and morals of those voters, but uphold them. I say all this to back up my assertion that Donald Trump is the best possible candidate for the Republicans for president. I support him fully, and very much so hope that he wins this November, because I truly believe that he will get the country back on the right track and moving in the right direction. However, it is my belief that you can support a candidate, plan to vote for them, and align with their stances on a whole host of issues, but also have some valid criticism. And that is not just a swipe at Trump. He is a human person just like the rest of us, and we each have our own flaws. None of us are perfect. It's really important to remember that. You can support a person running for political office while also admitting that they may have some blind spots in certain areas. In fact, it is actually good for those people that support a certain candidate, that are part of a movement, just like Republican voters that support Trump are part of the America First movement that he has led into fruition in a mainstream sense, and given us voters that belong to that movement a voice that we have not had in many, many years in the American government. It is actually important to speak up and let your candidate know when you're not happy about something, because they are first and foremost supposed to be representing your interests and the things that are important to you. And I think this really gets missed sometimes by a lot of people. In today's society, criticism of any kind of a mainstream political figure is taken to be a rebuke of them, completely and totally. But that is not how it should work. If you want your preferred candidate to represent you the best that they can, you should give them positive feedback when they're supporting the issues that you want them to support and that they should focus on, but also when they're making some moves that perhaps are not the best for both their political tenure and the accomplishment of their stated policy goals. And for that reason, I think it's important that conservatives talk about Donald Trump's recent endorsement record, because it has really not been that stellar. It's been a little bit subpar, honestly, and he has made some moves that I would consider to be outright blunders, and things that might come back to bite him in the future if he wins the presidency. If we look to recent primary elections on the Republican side, in just the last 2 weeks, we can see examples of what I'm talking about. Just this past Tuesday, there was a contentious primary in Virginia's 5th congressional district that is so close, it has not even been called yet. 2 days later, between John McGuire and Bob Good, the incumbent in this seat, running for renomination. Now, Bob Good, as I covered in my last video, is one of the best congressmen that we currently have in the United States Congress. He has a spotless voting record and is a solid conservative on every single issue that comes up for a vote. He has proposed, championed, and sponsored a lot of great policy solutions during his 4 short years so far in Congress after first being elected in 2020. At the start of this year, he became the leader and the chair of the House Freedom Caucus. So you would think that this would be someone that Trump would endorse, Trump would support, and get behind fully, since especially on things like foreign policy and immigration, someone like Bob Good is very closely aligned to him and his stances on those issues. But instead, Trump went out there and endorsed Bob Good's challenger, John McGuire, for reasons that I'll get into in a moment, but this is a horrible, horrible result for conservatives in the House, not just because Bob Good is a member of the House Freedom Caucus and the current leader, but also because you're losing a solid, reliable conservative vote in this seat. Sure, the results are not certified yet, they're not confirmed. The race hasn't even been called for one candidate or the other, as just 300 votes separate the two candidates, with a couple hundred to 1,000 remaining votes to be counted, mostly of the mail-in ballot variety, from several counties. And sure, those counties do favor Bob Good by and large, being areas that he did well in the primary. It still is more likely than not that John McGuire holds on, which is very unfortunate because you don't know what his record is going to be. And it is almost guaranteed to be a downgrade from Bob Good, since John McGuire was really not that impressive during his short time as a state senator from Virginia. And while his campaign page looked a lot like Bob Good, especially when it came to things like opposing foreign aid, specifically unfettered aid to Ukraine, there are still definitely question marks surrounding him. So that's immediately a bad thing and a downgrade right off the bat. And I'm sure if Trump wins the presidency and John McGuire is nominated and wins in the fall, I'm sure he will fall in line behind Trump and his agenda when in Congress. But we just don't know that, yet we knew that Bob Good had a history of doing just that and going above and beyond in his time in Congress. So it's really astonishing that Trump would go out of his way to take out a conservative member, not a rhino, a conservative member of Congress, especially such a good one at that. And a lot of people are saying it's because Bob Good endorsed DeSantis during the presidential primaries, and that would make sense since loyalty is seen as a big thing to Trump, almost too big of a thing a lot of times. But Bob Good also did come out the day DeSantis dropped out and endorse Donald Trump. And there were many other Republicans in the federal government and across the country that had endorsed DeSantis and then switched their vote to Trump, and Trump has not targeted them like Bob Good. He has gone on to endorse them. And it's not like Trump and Bob Good have been especially enemies in the past. In fact, they have worked together. Trump endorsed Bob Good in the general election and the primary in 2022 when he was running for re-election to a second term. So it's not like Trump has always had it out for Bob Good and just this time was able to be successful in launching a serious primary challenge to him. And many other people say, well, it's just Trump listening to Kevin McCarthy about Bob Good, since McCarthy is obviously angry at Bob Good and supported John McGuire against him since Bob Good was one of the 8 Republicans to vote to oust him from the speakership. But that also wouldn't make any sense, because we just recently had in South Carolina another member of those 8 Republicans, that being Nancy Mace, who we can see here was going up against Catherine Templeton, and she basically doubled the vote total of her challenger, fending her off by a comfortable 27 points. And Catherine Templeton, her challenger, was endorsed by Kevin McCarthy. Meanwhile, Donald Trump endorsed Mace for re-election. And this was especially notable because Trump tried to primary her in 2022 for having a bad voting record in her first term after she also was first elected in 2020, just like Bob Good. Bob Good was endorsed by Trump last time, Nancy Mace was not. This time, Bob Good has been targeted by Trump, and Nancy Mace has not been. She's been endorsed. And the main commonality between these two is that they both voted to oust McCarthy. Yet Trump endorsed one and not the other. So there has to be something else going on here. And that other factor is Marjorie Taylor Greene, the controversial representative from Georgia. She is very close with Trump. She's a confidant of Trump, as he definitely listens to her opinions on different topics, especially when it comes to endorsements, which used to be a good thing. Marjorie Taylor Greene, from 2021 and 2022, after she was first elected in 2020, was one of the best representatives in Congress. She was very outspokenly conservative, especially when it came to federal overreach, having to do with COVID restrictions, and also having to do with the border and sending foreign aid across the world. But after the Republicans took the majority back following the 2022 midterms in the House, she completely fell off a cliff, where she used to not only be outspoken and very proactive, putting a lot of bills forth just to waste the Democrats' time and slow down their legislative agenda. That got replaced with being best buds with the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. And there was without a doubt some kind of deal made between the two, the terms of which must have coerced her into being his biggest cheerleader, becoming less outspoken, less good on policy, more cringe, and coming across more fake and just simply an attention seeker instead of a problem solver and a conservative fighter. Due to her downturn, she got kicked out of the House Freedom Caucus. And from what has been reported, Bob Good had a lot to do with that, or at least had a hand in it. And one of the results of that cutting of ties between her and the Freedom Caucus was some bad blood between her and Bob Good. And she endorsed and campaigned for his challenger, John McGuire. And in doing so, convinced Trump that Bob Good was bad news and that he should endorse his challenger to primary him out, trumping up Bob Good as unloyal, emphasizing Bob Good's endorsement of DeSantis, and used his vote to oust McCarthy, combined with him being a leading voice at the beginning of this current Congress, of the resistance to McCarthy being Speaker in the first place and forcing a bunch of concessions, making it take about 5 days and 20 votes for McCarthy to become Speaker at all, using this as proof to show that Bob Good was unproductive, chaos-causing, Republican majority dividing member of Congress that would only hinder Republicans' legislative aims and make them look bad. But this just shows that Trump needs to be careful who he listens to and who he trusts. That was a big problem in his first term. And like I said, 2 years ago, him listening to Greene would be a very good thing. Now it's not so much anymore. And this isn't the only poor endorsement Trump has had. It's the chief among them, and was definitely worth discussing at length. But he's had other ones recently. We can look to the state of Oklahoma. All 5 districts are held by Republican incumbents, and the only one of the 5 that Trump endorsed was Tom Cole in the 4th district, who has been a representative for over 20 years and is nothing special. And it stands out because he was the only Republican in Oklahoma that had a serious primary challenger. Paul Bondar, who spent millions in this race, and sure, he fell quite a bit short, but what if Trump endorsed him instead of Cole? What if Trump just stayed out of the race and didn't endorse anyone, at the very least, at the very minimum, not endorse Cole? Because he didn't endorse any of the other 4. Kevin Hern and Josh Burchine in the 1st and 2nd districts, respectively, are very solid conservatives, and they didn't get a Trump endorsement in the primary. Sure, they faced very little to no resistance. Cole was the only one who had a serious primary challenger, but he is also probably the least impressive among them, with the most iffy voting record, especially when it comes to immigration, a key part of Trump's agenda. Moving back over to South Carolina. In the 4th District, we had the incumbent William Timmons facing a serious primary challenge against the very conservative Adam Morgan, who was a member of the South Carolina Freedom Caucus. And we can see that he barely got by, 52 to 48, a little over 2,000 votes separated the two candidates. And Timmons outspent Morgan by a lot, and Morgan still got that close. But Trump endorsed Timmons. Why not just stay out of it or endorse Morgan, who will be a more conservative option? Timmons is a rhino at worst, a weak Republican at best. Adam Morgan would be a solid conservative behind Trump. And I get the political game. Trump probably does not want to create a lot of bad blood with the current Republicans in Congress by trying to remove them all before coming back in potentially, hopefully, to a second term, because then everyone would be mad at him and not want to work with him if he targeted every mediocre Republican under the sun. But if you apply that logic, why endorse William Timmons and Tom Cole, who are your average establishment Republicans, but go after Bob Good? It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't seem very productive. It seems short-sighted. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has also hurt the conservatives in other races, because it's not just Bob Good she's advocating against. She's also mad at the Freedom Caucus in general. Adam Morgan was endorsed by the House Freedom Caucus in this race in South Carolina. I would bet money that Greene advocated for Timmons instead of Morgan just to spite the Freedom Caucus. I personally do not think that Trump has anything against the House Freedom Caucus, like many believe, because he's good friends and a big supporter of Jim Jordan, who is one of the leading House Freedom Caucus members. He is very supportive of Matt Gaetz and many other members that he's close allies with, and that are in turn big allies of Trump. For example, Barry Moore from Alabama, who Trump recently just endorsed for November. He wouldn't have those relationships inside the caucus or endorse a lot, if not most, of those people. I don't think that's the motivation behind him targeting Bob Good. I think it's a combination of all the factors I talked about, but I think a lot of it has to do with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and that's a big problem. And Trump has had some other poor endorsements. We look at North Dakota recently. He endorsed Kelly Armstrong, the rhino Republican representative of the state, over Tammy Miller, the lieutenant governor. Tammy Miller was no perfect conservative, but I definitely think that she was a better pick than Kelly Armstrong. But hopefully he will be a better governor than expected, because the legislature in North Dakota should be more right-wing next session, because a lot more conservatives got elected to both branches this cycle than in the past, and that's a positive thing. Which also, by the way, happened in South Carolina. There were some rhinos that went down in the state legislature, specifically the state Senate, where 2 of the 3 Republican senators that opposed the abortion ban that Republicans tried to pass last session got defeated, lost renomination, and the 3rd senator of the group got forced into a runoff. So she might also go down. And finally, the last bad endorsement I'll mention of Trump recently was not endorsing Rick Becker to be the U.S. representative from North Dakota, a very conservative option, very well-rounded on all the issues, had a great platform. Instead, Trump endorsed Julie Fedorchak, who, kind of like John McGuire in Virginia's 5th, has some question marks surrounding her, is a little bit unproven, but at the very least, I think she'll be an upgrade over Kelly Armstrong. And also, like McGuire, if he actually wins the nomination, when all the votes are counted, I think she will fall behind Trump and his agenda if he wins his second term. So this is more of an example of Trump passing over a better candidate, but not endorsing the worst candidate in the world, and someone who will probably still at least be decent. And Trump has also had several good endorsements throughout this cycle. In Virginia, he endorsed Hung Cao for the United States Senate, a very good candidate on both policy and electorally. He overperformed in 2022 when he ran for a very Democrat district for the U.S. House, coming very close to knocking off the incumbent. And he also is just good in the issues, has a good platform and messaging. And Trump has also had a lot of great endorsements for the U.S. Senate all around the country. He endorsed Jim Banks in Indiana and cleared the field for him. He endorsed Eric Hovde in Wisconsin, who is probably one of the best Senate recruits this entire cycle. He went to bat for Bernie Moreno in Ohio against the Republican establishment in the state and got him through the primary to be the nominee. He recently endorsed Trent Staggs from Utah to replace Mitt Romney, who was the most conservative option in that primary field. And it can't be forgotten that he endorsed Mike Braun for governor of Indiana, Patrick Morrisey for governor of West Virginia, and Mark Robinson for governor of North Carolina. For some reason, he's had great endorsements at the Senate and governor level, but really hasn't had many endorsements that were really solid for the House. He's had a couple here and there, like in Georgia's 3rd, he endorsed Brian Jack, who was a former member of his administration, which I thought was a solid pick. He's overall pretty conservative and will definitely be an upgrade over the current incumbent in the 3rd District of Georgia, Drew Ferguson, who was pretty underwhelming. And at the state legislative level, he endorsed David Covey against Dade Phelan, the Rhino Speaker of the State House in Texas, in that primary there. So this video is not to say that Trump only endorses the worst, most establishment Rhino candidates every single time. But he's had some notably bad endorsements recently, and I think it just needs to be talked about, because he needs to be called out on it. Because decisions like primarying Bob Good and not taking an opportunity to get an upgrade over someone like William Timmons from South Carolina can be moments that he will regret if he wins the presidency again. And those members do not back some of the more conservative items of his agenda and roadblock good bills from being passed. He will definitely wish he had an Adam Morgan or a Bob Good in Congress on his side, voting for his priorities. Trump is great on the issues, he's a great campaigner, and he was a great president. But like any president, like any person, he's not without his flaws. And as his supporters, it's our job to call him out on those flaws, to push him towards overcoming them, to make sure that he can be the best representative of our interests and the best leader of the conservative movement that he can possibly be. I still have confidence that Trump's second term would be more successful than his first term, both from a personnel and legislative standpoint, because there are more conservatives in government today than there were when he was inaugurated back in 2017. But there is still also a long way to go. And if Trump makes a bad endorsement, that's where it's important for Republican voters to do their own research and not just blindly vote for whoever he endorses because, oh, well, they must be great if Trump is backing them. Not always the case. And doing research before you vote for someone is important, regardless of whether it's someone that Trump has endorsed or not. If people can spend much time and many hours doing research for players that they want on their fantasy football teams, I think people can spend 10 to 15 minutes before going to the polls to dig into which candidate is the most conservative and best aligns with their values. And from here on out, Trump needs to realize that yes, his endorsement is powerful, which makes it all the more important how he uses it and who he gives his endorsement. He needs to make sure that he uses it to push the Republican Party in the right direction for the future and fill the party and the government with solid conservatives that will continue the America First movement and the work that he started in his first 4 years into the future once Trump's time in the spotlight has ended, hopefully after another 4 years in the White House.